importance. Trayvon Martin and the fight over health care. Protests swirled today at the Supreme Court as justices heard historic arguments about the central part of the president's health care law, the individual mandate. We'll go inside that courtroom later in the show. But we must start tonight with an ugly campaign being launched against Trayvon Martin's reputation. Just a month and a day after he was shot dead, today the Miami Herald reports about multiple suspensions, painting a complicated portrait of Trayvon Martin. The paper obtained a Miami-Dade Schools police report with no names attached, revealing last October a school police investigator on a surveillance camera, quote, hiding and being suspicious. The officer says Trayvon then marked a door with a graffiti marker and found 12 pieces of jewelry with a large flathead screwdriver described as burglary tool in his book bag. There are reports Trayvon was suspended for graffiti. Also, this headline from ABC News: Trayvon Martin's shooter told cops teenager went for his gun. And an unnamed police source says Martin knocked him down with a punch to the nose, repeatedly slammed his head on the ground, and tried to take his gun. This information is being leaked by an unnamed police source and is coming from what George Zimmerman said. We cannot confirm any of this as fact. Now, this comes a day an unnamed police source leaked to the Orlando Sentinel that Zimmerman said Trayvon decked him with one blow, then began hammering his head. They also leaked that Trayvon was suspended from school after being found with an empty marijuana bag. All this information comes from unnamed police sources and from the shooter's mouth. What does the acting Sanford police chief have to say when asked about these leaks?
As of right now, there's nothing to report on that, Chief.
Nothing to report on that. The suspensions, the book bag, the graffiti, none of that really matters. What really matters is what happened that night. Trayvon was unarmed, walking home with Skittles and iced tea in his hand, on the phone with his girlfriend. And his girlfriend said he was scared.
Trayvon said the man still was following him, and Trayvon asked for Trayvon to run. And Trayvon said he ain't gonna run like that. He was gonna walk fast. Following him, like walking fast, like fast, like when Trayvon walking fast, he was walking fast. That's what he started to follow him. Like he getting close about him.
It's not about who Trayvon Martin was before that fateful night. It's about that one night alone. And it's ugly what they're doing. We cannot and will not allow them to have this conversation their way. This is about justice. Joining me now is Eugene O'Donnell, professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He's a former New York City police officer and prosecutor. And Jonathan Capehart is an opinion writer for the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. He's writing about questions he has for the Sanford Police Department today. Let me thank both of you for being here tonight.
Thanks, Reverend.
Now, Eugene, let me start with you. I've been advocating that we want justice here, that I think probable cause was there, the shooter should be arrested. Now we're hearing all this smear on Trayvon. Is there any question that the police investigation has been botched up from day one? Isn't that the issue here?
Well, not only were there major questions about the police investigation on day one, but ever since that time, this selective disclosure of information has been a problem. Obviously, the police and prosecutors have a duty to protect their victims. If you're going to set an impossible standard, you can't go into a police station and report yourself as a victim of crime unless you have an absolute pristine background. The criminal justice system would collapse if that was the standard. That's not the standard. Every single day, we try to encourage people with problems way more significant than Trayvon's to come in and get justice. So they're trivializing the justice system when you deal with school suspensions and try to make that a bar to a successful homicide prosecution.
Well, let me ask you this, because clearly, Eugene, there's some really absurd things. It would almost be funny to me if it wasn't so bizarre. Let me show you some of the right-wing media smearing of Trayvon. And you, as a former prosecutor as well as detective, I want you to tell me if this has any bearing on the case. Conservative Daily Call obtained Trayvon's tweets and pointed out his gold teeth in the picture. Or I guess you really ought to put out a bulletin, shoot to kill if someone has gold teeth, that you need to defend yourself against that. The Judge report also posted a photo of Trayvon from his Twitter account showing him with gold teeth. And earlier today, the Judge report led with a story, had a photo of hoodies that the Obama campaign is selling. When you clicked on that, you get sent another page that asks, coincidence, when the Obama camp announced via Twitter yesterday that it was putting its 2012 hoodies on sale, it got some thinking, is the president trying to capitalize on the death of Trayvon Martin? I mean, isn't this desperate? I mean, first of all, whatever Trayvon's background is, and I'm told that much of this is totally wrong, but let's say if it all was right, how does any way this remotely justify Zimmerman, who's on tape saying he was following him, shooting him? I mean, let's say he had something in his locker. He went to school in Miami, hundreds of miles away from where he was in Sanford. He was near his father's girlfriend's house. He was going to watch the game. I mean, what are we talking about here? Is this absolutely an attempt to distract and smear?
Well, I do honestly believe that the overwhelming majority of the American public that's tuning into this cares deeply about justice for the family in this case, and will ultimately care, I do believe they will ultimately care, if criminal charges are preferred, that Mr. Zimmerman get a fair trial. But that kind of crazy smearing of a victim should be condemned by anybody who cares about justice. Again, if you're in law enforcement, you know victims come to you. Some of them are alive and some of them are dead. Most of them are imperfect, and you have to make sure that, particularly in a homicide, their lives are vindicated by the justice system. They can't speak for themselves. That's a fundamental tenet of homicide prosecution. So you have to protect them. They're no longer alive. You have to protect their reputation and not allow it to be smeared and allow a case to be made based on the evidence and based on the facts.
Now, Jonathan Caput, you raised today some questions for the Sanford Police Department. You said several things that were strange if you didn't, and the fact that you hadn't gotten the answers yet. Trayvon's father, one question, tried to call his cell phone. Why didn't the police answer it? He's there, medical examiner's office, dead, cell phone ringing, never answered it. Police. Officer who put Zimmerman in handcuffs reported, quote, at no point did I question Zimmerman about the incident that had taken place. Well, why didn't he? Why not? Third question, was there blood splatter from Trayvon on Zimmerman's clothing? Were any photographs taken on Zimmerman's clothing? Was the clothing taken into evidence? And were there any signs of struggle on Trayvon? It seems to me, Jonathan, after reading your article, if they're now saying, even one saying that Trayvon was reaching for the gun, another saying he was banging this guy's head on the ground and there was blood, then why didn't they keep Zimmerman's clothes? It would seem to me that that would be the first thing you would do is keep all the evidence, because they would have to have been blood on Zimmerman's clothes.
Right, exactly. You have a dead person lying on the ground. You have the shooter who admits that he shot him. You have him in custody, in handcuffs, in the back of a car. You bring him to the police station, and at no point are any tests done. Not gunpowder, not DNA testing, no photographs, nothing of George Zimmerman's clothes are done. And on the flip side, we know that a toxicology test was done on Trayvon Martin, but was one done on George Zimmerman? These are questions we don't know.
And the thing that I would add to that is, if one was done on the deceased, on the victim, then why wasn't one done on the shooter? Exactly. And who decided that? And if you want to talk about backgrounds, the shooter, we know, had been charged with assaulting a police officer. There had been accusations of beating up girlfriends. I mean, you talking about whether or not there was some school suspension with Trayvon. You're talking about a guy here that was charged with violence and charged with that with a police officer. But let me interrupt you a minute. We have breaking news. We have breaking news. According to ABC News, this is breaking right now, the lead homicide investigator in the shooting of Trayvon Martin recommended that George Zimmerman be charged with manslaughter on the night of the shooting. But authorities said there wasn't enough evidence to get a conviction. Interesting. Let me go to you on that, Eugene. First of all, if the lead investigator had recommended to arrest him and charge him with manslaughter, then why wasn't he arrested and let a prosecutor decide whether to indict him and whether it was enough to convict him?
It's a compelling piece of news to find out the investigator thought that. I think the state's attorney really has a lot of explaining to do here. If the police were confused about the law, I'd really like to know where the state's attorney was, because both of them should have been joined at the hip. And as John a full court press from the beginning, and a lot of this is just checklist stuff. This is not a really terribly sophisticated investigation. There's just a whole long list of things that should have been done, a lot of which apparently were not done.
Jonathan, I think this last ABC news flash is significant, because here's why.
Yes.
If the lead investigator on the homicide recommended manslaughter, then either there was never said that night that Zimmerman was beaten and that Zimmerman's gun was gone after, or if it was said, the lead investigator apparently didn't believe it.
Right. Apparently he didn't. And this gets back to one of the questions I asked when I asked 16 other questions last week. And the one question that I had was, what was the relationship between George Zimmerman and the Sanford Police Department? And I keep coming back to that because of all the questions I asked then, all the questions I asked today, all lead back to the Sanford Police Department. Why weren't things that any viewer of Law and Order or CSI or any of these detective shows that are so popular, why are all these questions that we can come up with off the top of our heads, we don't have answers to them 1 month and 1 day after Trayvon Martin was killed? The fact that we don't have the answers to these questions is, quite frankly, alarming.
No, it's very alarming, and I think that the more you're getting these unnamed police leaks, the more you feel somebody there is trying to cover their tracks, and somebody's doing a bad job, because some of this stuff is ludicrous. I mean, a gold tooth, and a guy going for a gun that he didn't even know the guy had. I mean, all of this stuff is bizarre. But Eugene, this is a compelling new piece of information. If it is true, what ABC is reporting, that the lead investigator wanted manslaughter, then it is also one must believe the lead investigator felt that Zimmerman was guilty of at least or appeared enough guilt for probable cause to make an arrest, which leads us right back to Jonathan's point about the Sanford police. Who vetoed that? Who said no?
It remains to be seen, but there clearly was a determination, if that's what ABC News is reporting, that there was probable cause, which would seem to also suggest that the detective read the evidence as other people are reading it, which was pointing at Zimmerman, and that Zimmerman's story did not hold water. That's what it appears to mean.
Let me take a break. Jonathan Capehart, thanks for your time tonight. Eugene O'Donnell, stay with me. This is pretty big news. Coming up, we'll have much more on this breaking news in the Trayvon Martin case. The top investigator wanted manslaughter charges the night of the shooting.